It's Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs. Let's start the show with Lewis Tennant. Here we go. Guests and interviews that you're looking for with creators, innovators, and so much more. For all episodes and further info, verbalhighs.com is the place to go.
All right, welcome to Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs, a podcast podcasted weekly from a kitchen bench in Kingsland, Auckland, New Zealand. My name is Lewis, and I am the host of the show, turning 39 this week in episode years with Mr. Jeremy Parkinson, a fellow who has produced. I thought this, I wanted to have Jeremy in for a while, but I thought just before election time here in New Zealand, leading up to our 3 yearly sojourn to the polls, it'd be great to have someone intimately entwined in the tentacles of New Zealand Talkback to come in and talk not only about their job but about how that particular Talkback voice of New Zealand is feeling. And we talk about whether Talkback's a barometer of the country or just a particular sector. We talk about the different hosts that Jeremy has worked directly next to since 1998. And we talk a whole list of, just looking, because I write down, I listen back and I sort of chuck down some keywords because I have to throw them into the internet machine thingy, behind the scenes thing with the buttons and the levers and the Steam thing, so that if people search, ideally these keywords bring stuff up, and it very much looks like I'm doing a mainstream New Zealand media podcast week by week here. But quite a list leading up to an election. Quite a list of broadcasting greats as well. Some words on my list: Greens, Sainsbury, Winston Peters, Talkback, Radio Live, Michael Laws, Sean Plunkett, Paul Henry, John Tamahedi, Wallace Chapman, Bill English, Radio Production, Christchurch Radio School, Mark Bennett, Radio New Zealand, Brian Edwards, Duncan Garter, Mark Richardson, Marcus Lush, Radio Pacific, Election 2017, Jacinda Ardern, Helen Clark, Banks, that's John, not the financial institutions, Matiria Ture, Winston Peters, etc. All topics obviously covered in the podcast because they wouldn't be on that annotated highlight list if not. I've been teaching my students Foley, which is the art of adding sound effects live in post-production for film. Basically, you go along with a screen with no sound and you add sounds as you go. Check out some Foley online if you haven't. There's actually a great short film, an award-winning short film about two Foley artists, which is a beautiful watch as they recreate the sounds in the scene live. So anyway, so I had a list of stuff I wanted for Foley, and I got out early in the morning. I was pressed for time that day, so I was like, I'll get to all the shops where I need all the stuff pretty bang on the start. So I googled the start time, and the old warehouse, the old Wari Whari here, near me at least, opened at 8 o'clock. So I got down there about 5 o'clock, keen I was, first person let in to a store, the music playing gently in the background, accentuated as it often seems at that time of the morning. Myself and what seemed like three staff, two behind the counter, one stacking. And because I was doing Foley, and Foley's about one surface contacting another, I had some women's high heels in a white plastic shopping bag. Because you see, footsteps are a lot of Foley. And I wanted to check that if I could find a bag of gravel or bark or whatever at the warehouse, or some sort of hard surface, that the stilettos would stilettos, they were women's shoes with a heel. Not sure they were quite stilettos. Would make the right sort of sound. So I was checking. So I was walking around with my plastic bag with my women's shoes. First person into the warehouse, probably 2 to 8 in the morning, realistically. And the warehouse didn't have a lot of the things I was looking for, so the list became far shorter. And as I came up to the counter, it dawned on me, like every scenario I've seen in crime recreations on television or in cinemas and the talkies and the films, I still had the bag of women's high heels in the plastic bag, and I was also purchasing a tarpaulin, some gaffer tape, and some heavy rubber gloves. Like the show at Verbal Highs Podcasts on Facebook, at Verbal Highs on Twitter. I have a website, it's verbalhighs.com. There's all the past episodes there. You can subscribe on iTunes. That's another way to find them. Please do, if you're local, you're in New Zealand, please do vote. On Saturday, I'm probably preaching to the choir with my podcast audience, but you never know. There was one year where I just the day got away from me, so it does happen even if we're enrolled. I wonder with the new way information's delivered, whether you download and listen to this on election day, whether it's technically illegal under old laws, because we do talk preferences and politics and so on. Thank you to Hallertau Brewery for your continued support, and thank you to Jane and Felix, who were the first people to donate, as I mentioned last week, to my fund to fund the website hosting for another year. I just said as a gesture of support rather than myself, desperately needing the money to be raised to keep the site going. I just thought the listeners get involved, and those two did in quite a particularly generous way. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jeremy Parkinson.
This is Dr. Tannen's Verbal Highs.
Sorry?
Yeah. Kia ora, kia ora. Oh, it was just another day, really. You know, we had another political leader, and we had James Shaw from the Green Party. So that was probably, is he the last one? I think we've talked to everyone now. So
have you?
Yeah.
And listener responses?
Oh yeah, it was quite good actually. We you start off, they just have a bit of a yarn, then you get the callers ringing in, but. We like to prioritise the ones that don't call often, so you do end up with, regular callers being bumped down the list, and you've got to have them. They're your bread and butter, so you sort of can't tell them to bugger off all the time.
A regular caller's a big part of it, are they?
Oh,
I mean, a big part of sort of holding talk back together.
Well, you can rely on them, but some of them, you just don't want to have anything to do with, but others. They're really into it. I mean, like yesterday we were on the road, and where were we yesterday? Good grief. Tauranga.
Oh, you've been taking the show on the road?
Yeah, we the last couple of weeks. So yesterday was in Tauranga. Week before we'd been in Nelson. Monday we were in Whangarei. It seems more than 4 days ago, God. But we had a whole bunch of people turn up yesterday who were just hardcore listeners, not necessarily callers, but they'd been listening. I met this one woman who remembered me from, 25 years ago when I was working with Surabut Muldoon. God, I was 19, for God's sake, and she was like, I know you're Jeremy. And I'm like, well, I'm just a behind-the-scenes guy.
Can I guess, was she there for Winnie?
Actually, she was there to see Sainsbury. This is in Tauranga. We actually had Winnie in Whangarei on Monday.
Yeah.
And we didn't actually have anyone come in, which surprised me. I don't know how well known it was that we were there. I mean, it was kind of a little bit under the radar. But by Thursday in Tauranga, we had a whole bunch, maybe 7 or 8 people, which might not be being mobbed. It was but this one woman had come from Rotorua.
Wow.
And she had dropped her kids off at school, and she made haste over to Tauranga to see Sainsbury. And, she was only probably in her late 40s, and she and Talkback had gone, hand in hand for decades. She knew she just sat there with her phone and filmed everything like she was the world's biggest fan. I mean, you can't not have those people involved. They're your bread and butter. Although what you really want is to encourage people who've never called and never, like today with James Shaw.
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Yeah, well, there is that. And every time you hear it, you kind of cringe. But at the same time, that's what you're after. You're after those people that you've never engaged with before, because you've said or done something which has encouraged them to call in. And that's what you're after every day. And if they pull out that hokey old line, well, what's wrong with that?
No, I don't think it's hokey at all. It's radio gold. The times I've got closest to calling, I never have, is actually, for me, where I get close is that's wrong. Whatever, it's that, sort of more often general information than opinion will push me. As a topic, I should say who you are. With me today at the kitchen bench in Kingsland, I have Jeremy Parkinson. He's a broadcaster, and would you call it producer for Radio Live 10am or? I'm at the moment I'm what's referred to as a technical producer, but my role really
with my background and many years' involvement is, it's in a way it's editorial as well. I'm part of the team that decides what we're going to talk about every day, and I make suggestions very early on in the day, which generally we stick to. Checking out what's in the media, what people are talking about over their cornflakes, and convincing my guy Mark Sainsbury to talk about them. We all come to that agreement. No one person has, apart from Mark. Mark's got full editorial control.
Oh, really?
If he doesn't want to talk about something, he won't.
Right. But
it is my job to look at those things, as it has been with everyone I've worked with. From probably 1998 or around about then, when I became a full-time producer of talk radio. It's been part of my job to look at the topics that are out there, and look at the host I'm working with and pitch it to them in a way which they can.
So it works for everyone.
If it works well, yeah. And there's things I'd pitch to Mark I would never have pitched to Michael Laws or Sean Plunkett or whoever.
That's who was in the middle. I was going to ask you that. I was trying to piece it back this morning. It started off, when I started listening, it was Laws, and then it was Sean Plunkett, and now Sainsbury. Is that the three you've had? Yeah,
so I was with Laws for a long, long time. He started at Radio Pacific in 2004. He did a year at Pacific, then Radio Live started in 2005. He went through to 2013 or something like that. Sean was on for a couple of years, and then Mark started.
Michael Laws is obviously a very polarising character. Is he playing it up for broadcasting, or do you get the same man off the air that you get on the air?
Well, that's it's a good question, because there is always an element of playing it up.
Yeah.
But not to the extent people think.
Yeah.
And when people use that term shock jock, it just gives me the shits, because I don't know anyone who just says things for the sake of it, because you're going to get caught out. And as much as they all get caught out at some point, Michael certainly put 25% on top, because you have to remember it is radio.
It is.
If you've got a camera pointed on you, you can use your face to express this, that, and the other thing. With radio, you've got to put something on top, because you haven't got those verbal, those physical, the facial features, those sorts of things to highlight what you're saying. Michael believed what he was saying, and he said things that pissed people off. But he was doing that before he entered broadcasting. He'll be doing that to the day he dies.
Probably why he was drawn to it.
Yeah.
It's like when people were just, I always see people sort of wholesale rubbish Paul Henry, and I always come from the point of view of having a real love for broadcasting and the talent of a broadcaster. I'm like, they're great broadcasters. You can't deny them that, whatever your opinion, their opinion.
Yeah, and I'll defend Mike Hosking up to a point, because everyone, and I've been seeing this over the last few days coming up to the election. People saying these broadcasters, and they're talking about Mark Richardson, he has to be unbiased. Well, no, he doesn't. He's actually paid to be biased. Yeah. It's not 1974 anymore. And there are positions in the media where you have to be unbiased, but. That's a strict journalist, and people say, well, Mike Hosking claims he's not a journalist, so he can say what he likes. Well, he's not. He is actually, he would have signed. He's
a compere. He's an announcer. He's a host. He's a host.
He's a broadcaster, and he's not a journalist. He doesn't have to stick to that. In fact, he's encouraged, and it will say so in his contract, say what the hell you like, because you're right. That's what it is like these days. And I saw an article the other day quoting Dr. Wayne Hope at the AUT.
Yeah.
And he was shaking his head and wobbling his jowls about broadcasters not being being biased. And I'm like, well, did you miss that memo? The last 30 years, it just hasn't been like that.
And it's up to people to make their own decisions based on... Is that what you're saying, based on other people's opinions?
Absolutely. And you don't expect your newsreader to be. You don't expect a journalist... you expect a journalist to be absolutely unbiased, and that's fair enough. And when they cross the line, their bosses will be... I've seen working up at the News Hub now, I've seen how it works. And if...
What's it?
Well, in terms of a journalist making editorial comment or proposing some, I've seen the powers that be rein them in, and that's how it should be.
Yeah.
But when it comes to people like Michael and Sean and
Paul
Mike
Henry.
Hosky, Paul Henry.
Yeah.
That's what that's why they're employed to be Paul Henry, Michael or Sean Plunkett.
Yeah.
That's who they are.
Yeah.
They're not told to. I mean, they're not. In no way are they meant to be anything other than who they are.
What do you think? We've gone in quite deep, quite early, Jeremy. What do you
dived
think?
right in there.
What do you think? Yeah. How do you? Actually, I'll switch that question up. How do you negotiate and marry kind of your perspectives and opinions on the world with different hosts you've had over the years? Is there sometimes been a struggle there, or is it strictly business? I'm going to quickly plug in this computer while you answer that question.
Yeah, no, I think it's strictly business. Although sort of backstage, you can you can fight the good fight and argue the toss. And try and convince them, of the error of their ways. But ultimately, it's them, and you are pitching to them something that is going to get them racked up. Sometimes it's something they may not have considered, but you think, well, here's a topic. You may not have thought much about that, but remember that one we did 6 months ago? It's kind of the same thing. So, you go for it if you like. But in a way, it is absolutely strictly business. You know who the person is you're working with. You know their limitations. You can see a story and you know that it's going to turn them on.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just... I have to say I did this quite a bit with Michael. I wouldn't suggest something because I knew that it would push him over the line. But then he's going to pick that anyway. Yeah. So you may as well, so the email I might send out every morning that might suggest a few topics might just not have had that one. So if he got himself in the shit, which happened relatively regularly, you can say, well, wasn't me. I didn't encourage him to do that because you kind of knew he was going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
So not to encourage the things that are going to push your broadcaster over the line. You let them do that themselves. Tell them that maybe I don't really think you should touch that one, but then back off if they insist.
I've got you in today. I know your role really interests me, but also I figured you're quite a barometer of the New Zealand public in terms of all these years you've been fielding them, to take calls on air and stuff. And you're welcome to tell me I'm completely wrong here on my observation. Do you think people have got more sort of tribal and rage prone since sort of the internet and social media and stuff came along? And what I'm meaning there, related to what we've been talking about, is back to the Paul Henry thing. I notice people still sort of however many years later, still pin one incident of one thing they might not have even watched. They just heard that he said on the show, and he's over in their minds. Are people kind of less tolerant now? Is that the right word? The pile on?
Yeah, the pile-on's an interesting one, actually. A good example was the Roastbusters thing. I won't dwell too much on that.
Yeah.
But, had we not posted that particular talkback call, and it annoys the hell out of me when people call it an interview.
What do you mean posted?
Well, we one of our...
You put it online?
One of our team put it online.
Yeah.
Had they not put that online, it would have, John Tamari may still be on air today. I mean, that was the end of his radio career. After a little bit of legal shenanigans, I have to say he, but my point is that the majority of people who were offended by that weren't offended by the broadcast.
So just one sec. So for my offshore listeners, what happened was a young girl's call was posted.
Yeah,
and she. What?
Yeah, well, she rang and she said she knew some of the victims of the Roastbusters. You can Google that one, Roastbusters shenanigans. And she was asked some inappropriate questions by the hosts. The host was stood down, and eventually John's contract wasn't renewed. But I think my point is that the damage, as bad as that was, the damage was done by putting it up on the internet and the secondary listenership, the ones that we encouraged to come to the site. That's where it went viral. It wouldn't have got further than that had we, there wouldn't have been. I don't think there wouldn't have even been, a written record of what was said. But it was
sort of talking about the immediacy of radio, and it comes and goes compared to. But then the counter argument to that is if he messed up on air. it was going to get an audience either way.
Well,
so.
it wasn't the audience so much. It was the pressure on advertisers. I don't think that would have gone crazy.
Yeah. So it sounds
doesn't make it right what he said.
No,
but it certainly would have mitigated some of the nuclear fallout.
God, we're going into another potential whole hour of conversation. The whole marrying commerce and broadcasting. You think we need public radio going into the future, as well as private?
It does. Oh, absolutely. I mean, no issue with that at all. It does. It does crack me up though. The insistence on needing to know an audience for public radio, because
needing to know how
many people are listening.
Right.
Just take your 50 million a year or whatever it is, make your radio, and know that you've got the biggest audience in the country. Why do you need to know how many people are listening? We do because we've got advertisers.
Well, no, because my take on that is you've got successive governments who will or will not fund to a certain extent.
The national government's never going to.
Yeah. So
you're not going to convince them by having numbers. And the Labour government is always going to. So you don't need to, look, ratings in my book are for advertisers, to justify to advertisers. And
this is who you
not to
peddle
make
your whitewear to.
And not to make you feel good. Yeah. And the feel-good stuff is, dear old Wallace, the feel-good stuff on Wallace's Facebook after he posted that, 250,000 people listen to him every weekend. Love you, dude. But honestly, we know that you've got a huge audience. It's like I listen to Wallace, so I'm justified in my listening because I'm joined by 249,999 other people. That's beyond me. And I know that. Our listenership in comparison is tiny.
You'd post on Facebook if you had 250,000, no?
No, well, I don't know if I would. I mean, I've worked at. I've never worked at a number one station.
Yeah,
I've worked at extremely in certain demographics, extremely popular, and at Radio Pacific, we were a very, very. Our Radio Pacific was a cash cow. Radio Pacific made a lot of money. It was might have been number 6 in Auckland around, say, 1996, 1997, or maybe earlier. We weren't number one, but we were making more money than anyone else. What do you need? Do you need to be number one and not making any money like My FM was?
Yeah.
Or, the point of a commercial station is to make money for the shareholders. And at that point, Radio Pacific was doing really, really well. And we were, of course, it would have been nice to be number one as well, but ZB's always, had that over us. And it's our job to take some off them. That's what our job is,
So ZB and Live, there's the obvious answer. The obvious short answer would be the direction you lean in politically. But how, in a broader sense, do you sum up the different listenerships, ZB and Live?
Look, I have no idea. I don't spend time thinking about it. I know that our main competitor is ZB and National Radio. But what can you do about it as a producer? You can just try to make the host you're working with the best he can be, or she, and worry and leave that other stuff up to the marketing department, because you can only concentrate on the on the show, on the content of the show. That the rest of it isn't up to you. And as much as it's awesome if you go up in the ratings and pretty shit if you go down in the ratings, all you can be is consistent. You don't go in every day going, how can I be better in the ratings? All you can say is, what is the best thing I can provide to my host to make them better? And then as they get better, as they, as they really hit their straps, hopefully, marketing's in there behind you and you're convincing people of switching. We're not in charge of where they place billboards or where they put ads on the TV. That's the stuff that gets them listening to the content that you're making.
So you in radio from, my God, is it dawned on you? You said 98, nearly 20 years.
No, I left school in 89, did my year in Christchurch at Broadcasting School in 1990.
Because you've got a family, there's a family connection in radio, eh?
Yeah, I had a couple of uncles, were both involved at Hauraki. My Uncle Chris, who died last year, he was one of the 4 founding directors of Radio Hauraki in the 60s.
Yeah. Was down on the shore when the boat went out?
Yeah, he got arrested, actually, Uncle Chris. He got arrested. He assaulted a police officer as they were trying to lower as the cops were trying to lower the
I've
bridge.
seen that footage. Yeah.
So he was in there,
Yeah.
appeared in court, all that kind of thing. So he was involved in Hauraki from 66 to about middle of 68 or something. Then he buggered off to Australia and worked over there. And another uncle, Mike Parkinson, who was an announcer on Hauraki as well. They worked in radio from the early 60s in places like Gisborne and just in the regions, and then came to Auckland and did that Hauraki thing. Derek Lowe also was my boss for many years at Pacific. He was one of the founders of Hauraki too. So that was a bit of a family connection.
Because for me it was no family connection. It was just being a kid and just being fascinated by it. Because you probably don't know, I've done some fair stints of radio in my time, but it was just knowing. It's one of the few things from an early age I was like, oh, that really appeals to me to do. So for you, was it sort of being around them and then being in the industry, or was there that fascination with being an audience member as well?
It's actually more like your story, because it was in the 80s when I started listening to Blackie and Phil Gifford.
I'm
John
a Wellington
Hawkesby.
guy, but
up here in Hauraki, and they were based down at Celtic's house, fourth floor Celtic's house. And I remember I was about 14. We had to school had a sort of a raffle thing that we had to go sell raffle tickets or whatever, and so we had the day off school. So I actually went into town with Dad, who worked at the Turners and Growers Markets, which was just down town here behind Celtic's house, and I thought, well, I'm just going to go up and see Blackie and sell them some raffle tickets. So I went up there.
They never met them before?
Well, no, they were just voices on the radio.
Yeah, good on you.
And so I went up there and I met Blackie and Phil Gifford, John Hawkesby, and a whole bunch of other people who I just knew from the radio. And 14,
what an age to be inspired.
But I also spent a couple of days that year.
Work experience?
Yeah,
I did the same.
At Radio Pacific.
I did it at Radio New Zealand because it was Wellington.
Crazy. And I met people like Joe Gilfillan, who's still at weekends on ZB reading the news. Yeah. Dear old Joe. Kevin Hercock, who's just retired from News Hub, he was up there. And a whole bunch of people. Lisa Williams was a journalist there. She's now in PR. And I think she was only about 18 herself, and I was only 14. And they sent me out with Lisa on a job. There'd been a fire at a marae in Mangere, and I went out with the journo. And strangely, at the age of 14, and I had that in my mind for the rest of my schooling, and I knew that at the end of school I didn't really know what I was going to do, but I thought journalism. I'd done journalism at school because of that, and my folks suggested that I do a journalism course, so I applied for a few journo courses. And
what were the ones in Auckland those days? What were the ones in those days?
Well, there was the AUT journo course, but I didn't even consider that. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe because it didn't have a focus on broadcasting. But then I applied for a Maori journalism course out of the Wairiki Polytech in Rotorua. And I went down. It was quite funny, actually. I went down to that, and I'd done Maori up into the fifth form at school, so I wasn't
this is part of your cultural heritage, or just an
interest? A little bit, but
it
was more of an interest. And I am part Maori, but I don't know if that came into it too much. But I just wanted to get in a journalism course, and I thought, well, there's this one. I kind of have a little bit of the Maori language. Yeah, so I give it a crack. Went down there. I got a interview.
Can count to 10.
Yeah, I can absolutely count to 10. And I think it's disgusting that Bill English couldn't, but that's another story. So I had an interview for this journo course, and it was on the marae, and it was this is a little bit out of my comfort zone, because as much as I've got a little bit of it in my heritage,
not immersed in the culture.
No, absolutely not. And I don't know if many people were in the big cities in those days. And I sat down at this thing, and my folks were allowed to come along as my support people. They're actually in the interview with me. Yeah. And this old Maori bloke who was he wasn't the head of the course, but he was the head of the selection committee. He looked at me. The very first question he said, "You're a little bit olive-skinned, aren't you?"
That's what he said.
And I was like, "What the hell?" I was like, "Yep, but I'm keen as mustard." And it turns out I didn't get on that course.
Oh, okay.
And then but when they found out that I did get on the Christchurch Broadcasting School, I actually got they they sent me a letter, said we've now accepted you on the course and here's some money, and they were offering me it's like $600 a term to come on their course. So
why?
I just think that they probably felt as though they should have accepted me. I don't know.
Who was offering you $600?
The Wairiki Polytech, because they'd rejected me, and then when they found out, I think there was a person on the selection committee who was involved in the anyway. So I didn't do that one. I ended up doing the Christchurch one, but I'd also applied for the Manukau Polytech journo course, which was for Pacific Islanders.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, this is pretty interesting and I rang up, and I didn't get any further than ringing up, and I said to the lady, I'm really interested in the course. She said, are you a Pacific person? I said, yes, I am, because I am. She goes, are you Polynesian? I said, yes, I'm part Maori. She goes, no, are you a Pacific person, a Pacific Islander? I said, well, the North Island of New Zealand's an island of the Pacific. Come on, I'm desperate here. She goes, no. I said, I know what you're talking about. So that wasn't an option either, but it was...
So you went to the capital letters, Christchurch radio school.
Yeah.
That's still going now.
Still going today.
Yeah.
It's going strong. It's a pretty decent course, and even back then was pretty sweet too. We did it as a 7 or 8 month journalism certificate, and then I went on from there to doing a course in radio broadcasting. And
do you think? I mean, and by the way, because it sound like what's the expression? Cutting off your to spite your. I can't remember the expression. Your thingy and your thingy. Because I teach a bit of radio at AUT. But what has occurred to me is that some of my favourite broadcasters of all time haven't actually been through radio school. Do you think everyone needs to?
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Still, I mean, I think you're probably looking at the last, some of the people that were the last to not go through formal courses to be journalists. I mean, they were on the verge of retirement now.
Yeah.
No, even then. I mean, I think with journalism, I think generally
we're
it's
talking
been
written journalism.
And they went from written journalism to broadcasting, like Kevin Hercock did. He went from I think there was a Wellington course to radio journalism within a couple of years and never looked back.
Yeah.
But in terms of radio announcing, I think there was formal courses, but they tended to be, Radio New Zealand, the government training courses. And for private,
with a slight British,
and people like Mary Jane Tomasi, who I work with to this day, she went through those as well. There was a commercial course. People like Mark Bennett, who was a great broadcaster, probably the best talkback host I reckon I worked with, most natural.
Wow.
A little bit under the radar. I don't know if people rate Mark. It's been a long time since he's been on the radio, but he did the official government one too, plum in your mouth stuff.
Yeah.
But then with commercial radio coming along in the 70s, I mean, really, you could just walk off the street, and if you were keen, you got a gig, and that still happens.
Yeah,
that still happens. It's to a lesser extent,
Yeah.
but I mean, if a kid is keen enough and they want to be a panel operator at Radio Live, they can just
rock on up. And I say that, man, because that's how I ended up doing stuff I did, was just being there all the time, not going through broadcasting school. And I say that to my students. It's like, you can do this course. It's a great course. Well, you are doing this course, obviously. 3 years here, Get out there while you're here. Go and knock on some doors. Go and say, I'll do this and do that. The trouble is, these days, though, what I wrestle with is there's a bit of a culture of exploitation now where people are expected to go on these really long internships. So I think it's a much more of a balance these days into when you go, freaking pay me or give me
I mean, if you come to Radio Live and want to have a crack at it, behind the scenes stuff, we'll sit you down for a few days and, over a period of, maybe 6 overnight stuff.
Pretty quickly sorts the wheat from the chaff, doesn't it?
Yeah, and if you show a little bit of nous, if you can work the things, then we'll start paying you, and you can do the odd midnight to dawn, and then you can
go, folks.
That's just the way it works.
Yeah. But do you get hosts walking off the street like that?
We have done. I mean, in fact, Mark Bennett, as much as he was a broadcaster of, he was on ZB on the Drive show. He was, from the mid 70s right through to the late 80s. He wasn't a talkback guy, and just one day, Brent Impey, who ended up running MediaWorks for many years, Brent Impey was doing a talkback shift. He went outside to buy a cup of tea or something, and Mark was walking by. He got Mark in off the street, quite literally, and Mark started doing it.
He must have said something entertaining out on the road to come inside.
Yeah, well, I mean, because he'd gone out of radio, gone farming, and was in town. I think he was just about to sell his farm. And he was working full-time as a talkback host within weeks of that, and he did really well.
From the heartland to the microphone of the city.
And after about 6 months of work, he looked at me and said, "I don't think I've thought as much as this in my entire life." Because he really put a lot of effort into, because he had the broadcasting skill. So, time checks and quarter-hour maintenance and all that stuff. He didn't have to worry about that. He knew what a radio show should sound like. All he needed to do was to turn the practicalities of his life into a radio show, putting his opinions on the radio to get a reaction from the audience. That was the trick for him.
I want to just pick up on something you said before, because it is a really particular style of broadcasting that not every broadcaster could do, the talkback host. And what are the skills that you mentioned that a talkback host needs? What are you dealing with
for a start, you've got to like people, and you've got to like conversing with people.
Does Michael Laws like people?
Oh, yeah, he does. He does. And he's an odd fish, Michael. But
he is an odd. That's a great description. Yeah,
He absolutely loves.
I haven't figured him out. Sorry. Anyway,
well, actually, it's funny you say that because he's a tough cookie and he's tough on people. But we never had, in the 8 or 9 years we worked together, we never had a harsh word said. In fact,
oh really?
Yeah,
right.
he it took about a year for him to trust my judgment in terms of topics. It was one day he died in the arse on something, and I'd suggest. I never stopped suggesting things.
Yeah.
But he tried something I'd suggested, and away we went. And he looked at me at the end of that show, and he said, "I'll never, ever not listen to you again."
Oh.
And I went, well, and he never did.
Oh.
And it was pretty cool.
So hang on to this. Like people? I'm going to write these down. You've got to like people.
You do, and you've got to be able to say. You've got to be able to go to a pub and to be able to just chat to someone you've never met.
Yeah.
That's what it's like on Talkback. If you can't do that...
So you've got to be sort of approachable and engaged.
You can't be above your audience. You've got to be like one of them. Yeah. And, and I hear Brian Edwards...
I'm going to put every man here.
You've got to be every man. And, I know criticise Brian. I love Brian like a old Irish uncle. But he gave Talkback a good crack in Radio Windy in the 70s, at Radio Pacific in the 80s, and for a little while at Radio Live in the early 2005 or whatever.
Too academic?
Too academic. I don't think Brian liked conversing with normal people. He liked to converse with people of equal intelligence.
Yeah.
I'd argue Brian would suggest that people don't have higher intelligence. But, I just think it's not a great criticism of him.
No, it's not a criticism of him. I get exactly what you're saying, because I'm asking you what makes a good talkback host.
Yeah, I think you've got to be on the level.
Yeah, I've put every man. So that's two. Anything else? Like people, every man?
And listener. You've got to be a listener. You can't want to... talk over them. You can't want to impose your opinion all the time, although the show has to be
something I struggle with. Jeremy, see what I did there?
Well, it is a struggle because you think you've got to keep doing it, but really you are there as a conduit. You've got to throw out your opinion because no one's going to give you theirs if you don't give them yours.
Yeah, the one I find where I really notice that come into play is like when someone calls up, and I don't know if unhinged is the right word, but they how do I put it? They just sort of come with a whole lot of nothing in terms of content for the show. Yeah. And then I'll listen to someone like Mark, very politely kind of keep the wheels turning.
Yeah.
But so as not to make this person come off second best, if you know what I mean. Yeah. You know those calls? Of course you do. You've done it for 20 years.
You've got to take, you've got to weigh it up because sometimes you've got to slap someone down.
Yeah. Because
they've said something so completely ridiculous that you don't want. Just say a good example is a few months ago there was this thing about and this pops up every now and then, pre-Polynesian civilizations in New Zealand, right? When you get that guy calling,
that's going to be a can of worms.
You've got to just cut him off at the knees. You've just got to say, dude, you're absolutely full of it. I'm not going to, you can tear him to shreds because it's going to...
Do you mean where the facts just simply aren't there?
Yes.
What about...
I mean, that's a good example because, the scientific evidence isn't there and people like to
What about
raise
something
that.
like 9/11 then?
Well...
By the way, I'm not one of those, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that hasn't really... Actually, because 9/11 is quite a good example of how a big news story isn't necessarily a good talkback story because you're going to get people ringing up and all they're going to say is, geez, that was pretty amazing. I feel sorry for the people. You know,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of
or
immediate...
or F the Muslims. Or
and that's completely counterproductive. So you've got to do it, but in terms of the conspiracy stuff, moon landings, that sort of thing, you don't really want to get down that track.
No.
It's just ridiculous. I mean, if in the middle of the night, you know, if it's 2:00 in the morning and you run out of callers, sure, just go. So anyway, Building 7, you know. And
what about those chemtrails, huh?
Yeah. Oh, so I mean, if you want a bit of a laugh, if you're taking the mickey a bit, you can do that. But I like to discourage my hosts from going there.
Is that a complete list? You've got to be a listener and every man and like people. That's quite a good personality profile, really.
But you've also got
you've got to be up on current events.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and you've got to have an opinion.
Yeah,
because if you don't have an opinion, if you don't broadcast that opinion, if you keep an opinion hidden, then you know, what's the point? You can sit there on the fence and ask questions. And, you know, some hosts struggle with that.
I was just thinking, because Mark's quite diplomatic compared to someone like Michael Laws. So I don't sort of put him and strong opinion, married together in my head.
But, you know, that's why Mark was, I think that's probably why Mark was employed, because he is a nice guy.
Yeah.
He has opinions. He'll let those opinions go throughout the show. He won't impose them, but as part of the conversation, his opinion, it's a different way of doing it. Laws will throw his opinion out. There you go, that's me.
Yeah.
Mark's opinion is more subtle.
Yeah.
So his opinion will come out. I mean, I encourage...
From under his moustache.
Yeah, well, I encourage him to be a little bit more overtly opinionated.
Yeah, good.
That's a bit of an uphill battle.
Why don't you wind him up by playing devil's advocate all the time?
Well, see, and I suggest to every host I work with for the first time, I say, and I've worked with plenty who have just started, that's one of the first things I tell them, devil's advocacy isn't for the radio. That's for something else. Because if you play devil's advocate, unless you are overt and say, I'll play the devil's advocate here, but even that's just rubbish. If you don't do that, and if you play the devil's advocate for the sake of it, you're going to get found out eventually.
Yeah.
So a person who listens to you a lot will say, well, didn't you say the exact opposite 3 weeks ago? Well, that's undermined your credibility completely.
Perfect. So you're shit stirring, but you've got no spine.
Yeah, so with former journalists, and you know, there's been a trend to have towards having former journalists now presenting opinion radio. That's something they struggle with, and part of my job is to encourage them to express their opinion, because they're no longer paid to be journalists. They're paid to express their opinion. They use their journalism to inform their opinion, and it's something that you know, they've got to get to really quickly. That was
you've actually led me to a question I really want to ask about that, which is there any journalistic mandate or thing that you have to adhere to in talkback radio, or is it just opinion and entertainment?
Oh, well,
do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
is there a weird marrying of both, or
there is? There is, because you've got to look at things like defamation and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So basic common sense. I don't want to get the shit suit out of me kind of rules.
Yeah.
Which are common in journalism and in talkback radio.
Yeah.
When interviews and that sort of thing, if it's a straight news interview, then it has to adhere to. But if you've got someone on because you want to grill them, you're grilling them from your perspective. You know, so there is a blurring of the lines there. You know, your opinion will be more overt in some of those interviews.
Yeah, because it's worth pointing out you are a hard news station too. That's how you brand yourself. You're a hard news and talk station.
So so there is both, and you hope that your listeners understand that, but not all of them will. You know, we do get, especially at a time like this in the run up to an election, and this is probably a good indicator of how relatively unbiased. You got the lefties saying, "Oh, you're a great big right wing," and the right wingers going, "Oh, you all love the Labor Party," and you know that the mix.
Who's you? The
well,
host?
the station generally.
Yeah,
so you know that the mix is probably quite good.
Yeah.
You know, you've got people who are like Mark Richardson on the Breakfast Show, who are overtly right of centre.
Yeah.
You know, I still don't know where Duncan Garner sits. He's still, you know, I know, you know, when I look at...
That's part of what I don't hugely like about him as a broadcaster, is he's too safe.
I don't know. Look, I don't know about safe, because what I get from his interviews is.
Oh no, he can. Yeah, he can drill into
and he drills into both sides.
Yeah.
And it's not like his opinion isn't out there when it's needed. You know that Ali Moore is probably a little left of centre. You get that impression. She doesn't have to, wave a greenie flag from the roof. But I think we've got a pretty good mix. But traditionally, talk radio is a centre right thing. So But
then the likes of Ali and Karen Hay and Live does feel a bit more.
But to see on occasion, Karen was pretty conservative.
Yeah.
So where does that place her?
That's the other. God, I don't want to get too much into that side of politics on the show. It's happened before, but this whole insistence these days, I feel with a lot of people that you have to be rigidly in one place. Well, I'm kind of not, because there's this issue, there's that issue. Wouldn't the world be a boring place?
And you look at ZB, and for the most part, they're right of centre, and I can't say that about Kerry Woodham. Necessarily.
Marcus Lush?
No, not at all.
I thought that was an odd placement. Good on him. I was into it, but I'm like, well, that's interesting that ZB are getting Marcus on.
Yeah, no, and good on him. He's done well. He was, he's a great broadcaster.
So with you're in the industry, it's my opinion on Mark Richardson, and you were mentioning the difference between sort of hosts and journalists. Well, he's a sports host, so if I just stick to reading the scores, I say.
Well, I don't know. It's not what he's paid to do. It's
I'm just trying to put him down.
If his contract says we want you to read sport and be Mark Richardson, he's being Mark Richardson. He's being paid.
I'll tell you what, bloody TV3's being Mark Richardson at the moment. I don't know if you saw. I posted the other day. I got up in the morning, turned it on, Mark Richardson. Got home, watched what's the one? The panel? No, the TV3.
Oh, the cafe. Oh no.
You know the one. I've made you forget.
The project.
The project. Yeah, which I actually think.
Which even I was on the other day.
Which package? Yeah. Mark Richardson again, and then in my block watcher notes, I skim past it later on. Mark Richardson again. I'm like, my gosh, it's funny how these channels they have one person just everywhere.
But that's the thing, you've got to have your personalities. You've got to have the guy on the billboard, and you've got to have him everywhere. You do. I mean, that's just.
And he's probably quite pleasant to appeal to a number of New Zealand women.
Yeah. And he's a decent guy around work. I don't have a lot to do with him. Sometimes I see him early in the morning. Sometimes I see him after they finish at 9 o'clock. And I know him more as a cricket player. I don't watch the block so much, but you can't avoid it if you're in the media. If you watch the media, he is everywhere, and I think that's probably a good thing for if the shows he's working on are doing well for the station. Then use him.
Yeah, you do have to worry you become overexposed though, and then who knows?
You do, but I'm sure they've got their measure of that. They're not going to let that happen.
So callers, that must be taxing sometimes, or I'd imagine. I found just not talkback, but just listeners who, because you're a voice coming through the speaker, can become they feel they have an intimacy that isn't there. Do you have kind of regular callers where you're kind of almost balancing being a support worker with a answer of the phones?
Well, many years and years ago, there was more of that.
So it does. And why do you think that's changed?
Well, probably the best example was years ago at Radio Pacific. We had a pretty decent audience. They were older, of course, and that was probably one of the reasons.
Yeah, that's sad.
Radio Live came along, and eventually Pacific was euthanized because they were attempting to get a younger demographic. Yeah. But some of those older people were really quite lonely.
Yeah.
Radio Pacific after 8 o'clock at night was something they could relate to in their loneliness, and listen all night. And in those days, Pacific was number one radio station between 6 at night and 6 in the morning.
Yeah.
People like Ewing Stevens and his talkback were rating 19-20% nationwide.
Yeah.
And when Radio Live came along, the company made a decision to pretty much give that one away and go for something a little bit younger.
But I'm still sure I hear a few pretty unhinged sounding listeners from time to time
look,
who are younger. You know?
Yeah.
I've certainly heard a few day drinkers call up, you know.
Yeah, and part of the job is to make sure that, you know, they are, A, have something to talk about, and B, aren't calling all the time, that they're not completely mental or inebriated. But if they are, and if they, you know, there has been on occasion, you know, a caller late at night who is having mental health issues, that you will help. Yeah. That you'll keep them on the line.
Good, right.
You know, that has happened.
That's sort of what I was meaning.
Yeah.
I'd imagine that can be...
But not so much anymore. You know, I remember spending some time on the line with people years ago at Pacific, getting them help and passing on the right numbers and getting their numbers and passing them on. But at the same time, you know, your job is to support your host and not be distracted too much by those things. So,
but it is. I need to get this clear. Actually, it might be just in my head. It is you answering the phones before they go to air. Or is that another staff member these days?
That is my job.
So the flip side of that, the more positive and, you know, touchy-feely, lovely side of that, it must be you must have some people you sort of have quite long-term rapport with now.
Absolutely,
and they might be people who, you know, you're a part of their contact with people for the day.
Very early on in my
how are you, Jeremy?
Very early on my work at Radio Pacific, I went to a cousin's 21st in Wairoa, and I had only been working at Pacific for probably less than a year, and I was working with a guy called Pierre Beautret, who was a psychologist. He's dead now, Pierre. But I was working with him every Saturday night, and I met this old lady at this 21st in Wairoa, this really old lady, and she was all gnarly with the arthritis and stuff. And my cousin called me Big Jazz, and that's what Pierre used to call me on the radio. And this lady looks at me and she goes, "Do you work with Pierre on Radio Pacific?" And this is just a nickname that And I was like, that's far out. And she was like in my ear the whole night, you know. You know, so that was my first taste of someone who had been a listener, and she was hardcore. Yeah. And as I said just the other day in Tauranga, there was two of our long-time listeners had come all the way, one from Rotorua, one from Tauranga. Man. Yeah. And they had been listening to stations I'd worked on for as long as I'd worked on them.
And it's something about radio, as a medium. I think it's a part of it as well. That voice with you, wherever you go, the landlord's going to start doing his property maintenance stuff again in a sec. Lovely. The other side, I mean, the other thing on the, as I say, the positive side of callers, and there's probably many of these over 20 years, so I'll put you on the spot if you can and think of one or two. But what about a sort of fucking wow moment where, you know, caller has just come on and something, I don't know, really approached an issue amazingly, or said something that is just an amazing moment of radio, you know? Those when you just go, what happened today?
Well, I remember one guy. We had a occasionally we'd have newspapers wanting to do stories on Talkback Radio, and they're always negative. But when they want to come in, and we might have a new program director, and he thinks all publicity is good publicity, and you think, well, actually, they're just going to rip the shit out of us. We had the listener want to do a thing on Talkback, and I'm like, the listener and Talkback, come on, that's never going to end
well. Look down their nose, are they?
Yeah, they're going to look down their nose. And we had a new program director, and he's like, oh, Jeremy, you know, we're going to have this journalist and a photographer from the listener come along, and I'm like, okay. And we had this, I had a list on the whiteboard behind me of callers that, this is before we had sort of computers that helped us track
you had
some of our regular
post-it notepads or something.
Yeah, I just sort of written a list of banned callers up on the whiteboard, and descriptions, because you've got to have a description, because you know, from one shift to the next, you know, we've all got to, you know.
You've got a sort of a most wanted list.
Yeah, so we had this caller ring in who was on the scene when a bicycle courier got hit by a truck or something, and that was, you know, that was just a little thing, and it ended. I actually can't remember too much about the end of it. So, bicycle courier. It was a really good story. We got on quite immediately. We had this guy ring up and say, you know, I've just seen this happen. Rah-de-rah. It was a news story of some minor significance, and as the hour went, you know, we were able to do this, that, the other thing. And it was quite a good example of how Talkback turns into a news story. You know, it was just a little thing. Yeah. And I had the journalist from List, and I had a photographer there, and they witnessed this, and I was sort of describing to them, how it was working, and, it was just a little thing.
Did they still spin it badly?
all they focused on was the list of banned callers.
Oh, right.
And, they didn't even ask why they were, but it was just like, we'd written descriptions which weren't particularly pleasant, but they were descriptions which helped the other program producers identify them, and it wasn't for public consumption. And I could have rubbed it off.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I thought they were. I thought possibly they were there to do the right thing and report. But they were never going to. The listener. That's not what the listener and Talkback Radio.
My armchair observation is that I feel like Radio Live has changed. It's changed my perspective of Talkback Radio. It feels like it does. It's a bit broader than some of the audience tropes we've discussed with, say, Pacific back in the day, or maybe even ZB. Do you think? And this is a question because I'm thinking you'd be a good yardstick for what's happening in New Zealand politics-wise at the moment. Do you think you get a snapshot of all New Zealand with your callers? Or is it
you get a snapshot, but then it is heavily weighted to... if you were to do a poll on, Winston, New Zealand first, 2 ticks, he still has that kind of talkback listenership sewn up. Now, as much as we get really good... national supporters ringing in with arguing the toss. We get Labour.
Yeah.
I think we're still occasionally.
Yeah.
We had James Shaw on today, and he had a few supporters ring in, bemoaning Materia's demise. But I think Winston is a bigger than life figure in Talkback Radio still. He still has that sewn up, and that's not going to be forever. Winston ain't going to be forever unless he is forever.
Well, judging by his audience on the news last night, he's certainly not going to be forever. And then they shot, I'm sure it was the TV stirring a little, they cut to the band, and it was like a banjo. They cut from these 95-year-old audience to a banjo to Winston's hair, and then they went back to the newscaster.
Ever since New Zealand first started in 1993 or 94, whenever it was, that's been the way. His audience are always going to have the purple rinse, and there's always going to be someone there in a wheelchair you can focus on and kind of make light of.
Cut to Dame Edna in the middle of the crowd. Awesome.
Yeah, but that's who he attracts, and to a certain extent that is Talk Radio's audience. As much as you probably would like it to be 45 to 55, it's probably 55 to 75.
Well, I'll tell you what, I don't know who she votes for, bless her. But yeah, my grandmother and that gold card, mate. She loves that gold card.
Oh, absolutely.
What a sweet name.
he knows his stuff. You have
off
to
to
Waiheke,
or off to Waiheke she was when she was up in Auckland for free. Fantastic. I think it's a great thing. But what's going to ask with the politics thing, Jeremy, taker of calls on Talkback Radio is how's New Zealand feeling at the moment, man? Compared to the last election and so on, I see more engagement. What do you see?
Yeah, well, I think we started seeing that.
Trump scared the Jesus out of everyone.
I was just going to say that that whole Trump thing. If we were getting people absolutely parroting that bullshit Trump Make America Great Again crap in the run-up to that election.
Kiwis weird.
Yeah, man, I just don't know. And Hillary was evil and Trump was evil. We were getting exactly that on Talkback. And I think that, to a certain extent, has translated into this election campaign. I think there is whether the Russians are involved or not, I'm yet to be convinced.
Yeah, I think what you're meaning there is not those... strange New Zealand Trump supporters, but are you meaning more what I am, that the fact that he's been elected has made people go, shit, we need to be thinking about politics, thinking about voting and stuff more this election?
I think the way we express our political point of view is more along the lines of how it went in the States. People are more, this whole.
Are you saying it's right skewed?
Well, no. I'm just saying that
Sorry, I've confused
people are, say for example, the way we look at the way we're influenced by social media. This last week and a half, tax, it's everywhere, and people are buying into those things, and their expression, the public expression of their political persuasion is more, they are more out there with them, you know, because and it follows the way the Trump campaign went. It follows the way people expressed themselves during that campaign.
Yeah.
We've learnt to express ourselves in a different way this election. I think, you know,
and you think that's a healthy thing?
Oh, not at all. No, I just hate it. I just think there's, it's not.
I think it's still. I think it's
less nice. You know,
I think it's very, especially your Trump-educated callers. I think a lot of it's everything you've spoken of is tied in with internet culture and pile-ons and trolls, and suddenly actually having an opinion that you feel like you're broadcasting, even though 3 people might be seeing it. If you're a Facebook person with 200 friends, all of that, being able to comment anonymously, very unhealthy. Yeah, no,
it's not, you know, and Talkback in no way is as bad as something like Twitter. The pylons on Twitter are just evil.
I don't Twitter. I've noticed people, at least in my circles, seem to sort of behave a bit more. We've kind of all learnt to use Facebook because this is a new thing, right? This is my take. I was actually listening to another podcast talking about this, but I agreed is we're still coming to grips with all of this, eh?
Yeah.
Like we're still fumbling over it all.
Yeah.
You know, so it's such a huge... Dude, you're in the communications game. It is such a huge change to our lives. I reckon since about 2007 it's really changed.
Yeah, where the boundaries are, and we overstepping the boundaries. I mean, I guess in a way, I mean, I use my Facebook, and it's just a personal Facebook.
Yeah, yours is like mine. It's a bit of work. It's a bit of personal.
I just throw out my opinion on that, and I mean, I didn't even think that that's what I'm doing. I'm just writing something. It might be a little bit silly. It might be a little bit serious. It might be a mixture of both.
Do you add randoms, or do you...
Oh, yeah, totally.
Okay, cool. So you've got listeners on there as well.
Yeah, I have. And sometimes, and it still amazes me, I can be commenting on a friend's Facebook, and someone will say, "Are you Jeremy from Radio Live or whatever?" I'm like, "Oh yeah,"
and they say that, and they go, "Just noting that down." Noting that down.
And you know, they'll send me a friend request, and I'll accept it. It's no big thing, you know.
Yeah. So if you had to call it, how do you think the election's going to play out?
Oh, I think like most people, I think it's going to be real close. I think New Zealand First will get a bit of a bump towards the end. The Greens will probably, from last night's... What happens always is Winston gets a bit of a bump and the Greens always fall back. So if the Greens are up at 7 now, they may end up at 6 or 5.5.
How accurate do you think those polls are? Is it bullshit that I've heard lately that they still only use landlines? I can't believe that. That sounds ridiculous to me.
No, we've had...
Have you got a landline?
Oh, no, and they don't. They don't just use landlines.
That's an old fact.
Totally. And it's something people will always raise if their party isn't done well. And we've had that explained to us a number of occasions.
Except for New Zealand First, because they can't, because they've all got landlines.
Yeah. Well, and that's probably why you'll find New Zealand First from last night's poll will probably go up a little bit, and the Greens might drop. That just always happens. And whether it's Labour or National, God, who knows?
Do you know how they do it? How do they do it, mate?
Oh, there's
it's still a list of phone numbers, cell phones, or is it online?
But there's online as well. There's all sorts of...
Have you, because you probably followed it better than I have, result of your job, but have you found in previous years that the polls are quite accurate compared to what plays out? Would you believe that up to 7% now is actually what the whole country...
Oh, look, there's a couple of polls which are always mad as a cat. I can't remember the name of the poll, but one of them is just so awfully inaccurate that one day it's going to be bang on, you know. And but no, I think maybe an aggregate of... Who did I hear? Was it National Radio yesterday doing an aggregate of all the polls over the last few weeks? Maybe that's a little bit more... You put them all together and see what happens. But, I mean, one consistent is clearly after the Ture thing, the Greens support dropping off... you know, and from...
No, I think that coincided as well with the rise of Jacinda. I think there's probably a lot of Green voters going, well, shit, Labour's got a chance. I'll flip
and
that
that happened
this
with
time.
New Zealand First support as well. But at the same time, you know, I expect they'll get a bump because they always do. That's just a guess.
So it sounds like you're saying it's been really close, and you're not going to call it. You're not going to call it.
No,
not even for entertainment purposes, Jeremy. Just for the okay.
No, I don't know. I mean, I follow it, but I don't follow it so closely that I...
So it's probably just... And it's like being a chef and getting home and cooking, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been lucky in that at the radio station. I've been able to have a chat to these people. Chatted to Jacinda the week before she became leader. I've got a friend who was who was deported earlier this year. He's got a New Zealand citizen daughter, and his wife's applied for New Zealand citizenship. She's an Australian. He was deported back to Bangladesh earlier this year, and I sat down with Jacinda and chatted to her about his plight. Rafiq is absolutely sitting in his parents' house in Bangladesh, pining for his family.
Jesus, that's terrible.
Sad story.
It's crazy, man.
So I'm in a way, I think a change of government would be good for Rafiq, and I want my friend back.
Yeah.
But that's a personal thing.
Oh, no, hey, listen, I wasn't calling your allegiances.
No, but I think...
I would never do that, but I hear.
If in a way, I've got my fingers crossed in that regard. But in terms of whether I'm going to vote that way or not, I just don't know. I mean, I like to... it's been funny in my job over the years, knowing some of these people.
Well, that's I'm a big believer in what's the person like.
Yeah,
irrespective of their policies, unless their policies are totally... what is the person? Are they a good person fundamentally?
Yeah, and
why are they doing it?
I'm in the North Shore electorate, and Maggie Barry's going to skin that puppy by about 10,000 votes. And I know Maggie, and I don't mind Maggie Barry, and I know a lot of people are like, rah, Maggie Barry, but I know her, and I would be, it would be silly to vote for anyone else in that electorate. I just think give Maggie a tick, because I ain't going to make any difference. It's not my fault. I live in her electorate. She's a nice lady.
My fault.
But I might use my party vote differently, and that's probably all you can do in that electorate, because I can vote for the Green candidate in that electorate if I want, but they're going to get six votes, and I'll be their seventh. So
excuse me. Yeah. You just made me remember something about. So this is Mount Albert, isn't it, Kingsland?
Yeah, and I voted in the Mount Albert electorate once when I lived on Great North Road, and I voted for Helen Clark that particular year because she used to drop me off at home after work on a Sunday, and she was a really nice lady. And
she was the MP used to drop you off. Was that because she was the last guest on the show?
She was the last.
She
finished at 6 o'clock and whatever, and she gave me a lift home. And equally, for many years, I worked with John Banks, and he'd drop me off at home, and he'd drop me off at a place that I was living in at just down here by Mount Eden Prison. Yeah. And Banksy would drop me off in the ministerial limo, and I'd jump out, and it was crazy.
Because I was going to say with here, and the big thing is information. Like how when you type something into Google, if it's already been Googled a bunch of times, it pops up. I was just trying to find out some info about the Mount Albert Green candidate. And I've just found it is just woefully difficult to get any information about what's going on in this electorate here. I thought it's bizarre. That turned up today. That's my list. Yep. That's the most comprehensive dossier I've had so far. I don't understand why the electorates are not trying to engage with people, especially online.
But you look at the...
Or am I just not supposed to know that information?
Well, you look at the New Zealand First list, right?
Yeah.
You got someone like Richard Prosser in the top 5 or 6, I guess.
Yeah.
What a knob! I mean,
Is this in my lecture? I don't
know. Just the general. You've got Richard Prosser, who's come out and said the most disgusting things about Muslims, and how anyone, clearly, maybe Winston's supporters, think that's a good thing, but what use are New Zealand First List MPs? It's Winston Peters. I mean, I know. Look, Jenny Marcroft's running for New Zealand First. I think she's number 9 on the party list. If they get 7% or so, 6.5%, she's an MP. She can make a great MP, Jenny. But you look at some of the chaff on the New Zealand First list, like the woman running in the North Shore, Northcote electorate. She's number 36. Of course, she's never going to be an MP. But some of the things that they're coming out with, that Winston Peters still has to rein them in, means Winston doesn't know these people.
He doesn't know his own. He doesn't know
these people. These are crazy people, and MMP. I love MMP in a way because your Parliament now looks more like New Zealand than it did before 1996. I thought Nandor Tanchos looked like New Zealanders.
I thought exactly that snapshot of New Zealand thing, where I've had that a few times lately, but my latest light bulb moment was just something really simple. Radio New Zealand asked a number of major politicians what their music tastes were. Sort of a couple of people there, I was like, You have no idea what's going on culturally in New Zealand.
Yeah,
today.
And
you do from 30 years ago.
Yeah, and I have had this argument over the last few days about Duncan Garner's question to the leaders this week about the counting to 10 and Maori.
I think it's a great question. I think it says so much.
And I had this argument with one of our other producers today, who's around about the same age as Bill English, and is probably projecting his own insecurities on.
What's Bill? Early 60s?
Early 60s, I guess.
Yeah.
He couldn't count to 10 in Maori, and I know that he's a studious guy. I know that he made a speech on a marae last year and everyone went, wow, Bill, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So he probably spent days and days and days working on that and he made a really good impression. But the fact that he couldn't count to 10 is absolutely damning to me. And in as much as Jacinda couldn't either. And
could she not either?
No, she tripped over a few.
Maybe it's where I grew up. Because you and I are hardly of the generation where there was a lot of Māori content at school. I mean, it was beginning when I was in school. I just know it from my schooling.
I had some great Maori teachers. When I was at primary school, a fellow by the name of Toby Rikihana. He is a classic. I had Arapera Blanc, who was a bit of a legend, and a guy, Alan Clark, who was a European, a Pākehā guy, grew up on the coast, spoke fluent Maori. I mean, some really good Maori teachers, and maybe that was a little bit weird for a mostly white kid on the North Shore. But I just look at Bill English failing that basic test and I think, well, okay, you might not have had it at school, but by osmosis you don't know the stuff. How many kids did you have? How much te reo were they taught at school? Did you help them with their homework? How can you not know this? And I've had arguments...
Because he's lived in a wealthy upper-class white bubble for his whole life.
And that is...
we both know the answer.
And that is damning. I think that you... I mean, but his kids, I'm sure all of his kids could, that he didn't sit down with them and help them with their homework and learn that sort of stuff just by being a New Zealander.
I ended up... saw something floating through the internet yesterday. I think I ended up on a More FM Test Your Māori page, and I was actually a little pissed off. I only got 8 out of 10.
I got 10.
I got 2 wrong. But the one I was quite happy to get right was the do you remember the maths question in Māori? I was like, yes, got that one.
And you've got to use your fingers sometime, you work it out. But if you take your time, I mean, I think we should just know these things. And I did have someone say to me, well, can you count to 10 in sign language? I said, well, I've got 10 fingers, I'm sure. Look, I can just go like this to a deaf person and would work it out. So no, I don't. And maybe I should, but I don't think I don't think that's quite the same as a Prime Minister not knowing 1 to 10 in Maori. I think that's just wrong, But there you go.
What do you think about this idea of strategic voting with MMP? MMP still confuses me a little sometimes. Is strategic voting a good thing, or should you just vote where your heart is?
You can only control your own vote. So for strategic voting to work, then you've got to have more than yourself doing it.
Yeah, that's right.
You just got to vote the way you feel, and you just got to line them up. You've actually got to spend a bit of time looking at the policy, which is why knowing what Labor wanted to do with tax was important. I think it was... the attack on that was a little over-egged by National, but I think it's important that we know. So you've got to do your homework. You can't just sort of let the wind decide your vote, and you've got to, just like any election, you've got to look at who represents you the best, and if that means a change from the way you voted last time. I didn't know which way my parents voted. I assumed...
Really?
I just assumed that Mum, being a school teacher... she was a bit of a Labor. I kind of thought maybe Dad was a little bit National. But I still, to this day, wouldn't know. I mean, I can't ask my dad now, he's dead. But I just always assumed that.
Last few things. Sorry, I cut you off there.
That's right.
Last few things on politics. You know who can fuck off? People have started calling Jacinda Taxinda, like the Killary thing. Oh, how clever! And this, whatever your political allegiances is, it's just whack.
And this little poem that's been floating around on Facebook about Jacinda, just stick your palm
I
up your
like
arse.
I do like fun stuff though, like memes for elections and stuff. I do like the Simpsons one doing the rounds. That
is a good one. That is a good one.
Which Simpsons character is each each party. So no,
and that's having a crack at everyone,
And you know what cracked me up there is with Matiria Ture. I joked to my friends that she's the Māori Lisa Simpson, and then they had Lisa Simpson for her. Perfect.
Yeah, and it was sad what happened to her. But I tell you what,
to me, they rode. I think the expression they played with fire. They tried a PR move that could have been brilliant, but it did exactly what they didn't want it to do.
What it highlighted for me was
you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. They've had ever since the Rod Donald days, the Jeanette Fitzsimons days. Dressing in suits, they've got this appearance of being a professional political organisation, but scratch the surface.
Tandoori nachos and bongs and
scratch the surface, and they're still a little bit mad auntie, and they didn't do their homework. They didn't say, if we're going to say this, what are the journalists going to find out?
Yeah.
Because it only took a few days for News Hub to find out that Materia was registered at a property that was still owned by her.
So you're basically saying the execution was flaky.
They didn't know how. They were naive to the ways of the media. It didn't take too long for that to come up. And when when News Hub went to Materia and said, well, this is what we've found out, she had to then double down on her, previous assertion.
It could only have gone two ways and nowhere in the middle.
So if they had worked it out, if they thought, well, what's going to happen if we come out, they may not have raised it.
My behind-the-scenes Greens story is a friend took me to a Greens fundraiser in Grey Lynn a few years ago, and they had tofu as spot prizes, and I belly laughed from the table and was ostracised for the rest of the night. So that's my Greens story.
It's a good story.
Last thing on politics, as I say, chef often doesn't go home and cook. Did you watch the young leaders debate last night? I thought it was bloody positive.
No, I didn't. Who was involved with that?
Chloe.
Oh, yes.
Now I'm going to be put on the spot for the names, and I'm going to have to do terrible descriptions. The younger national fellow who looks a little like a potato in a suit.
Probably showers in his undies, knowing a young Nat. Chloe's impressive, isn't she? I kind of think...
David Seymour.
Oh, God.
Young. Aside from Chloe, Young was a very malleable description in terms of who was on. But what I liked about it was... there was politicking. There will always be that. But it was a discussion for most of it. Seymour sort of barked people down a few times because he's more of an experienced politician. Yep. But I kind of liked how they actually just had a friggin' discussion, about topics and stuff. I just thought it might be a way politics might go with generational change.
Yeah, I tell you, you do know more
that
about...
politics thing's an old school human way of behaving, I think.
Yeah, you do know more about the young people in the Green Party than you do young people in the Nats or the Labour. And I was at a internet party.
Party? You're at an internet. Tell me you're at an internet party.
I was at an internet party launch or something at the last election. I had a friend who Kim.com had screwed over, and he'd done this thing where he'd got a whole bunch of Mercedes G-Wagons, and he'd painted them up anti.com.
Yeah.
So I went out to... It was quite funny. David's a bit of a laugh. But we went out to this internet party thing out at Kumiu, and there was a group of young Nats there sort of protesting, and it seemed strange that young Nats would protest. I remember one of them said to the other, just in passing, they said, did you see this year's law review thing, and this is their banter? And I went, you dorks, you think this was a guy trying to impress a young woman? I'm like, just ask her out for a beer or something, mate.
Go and look at the photos of their ball or whatever they call it each year on Facebook. They're mesmerising and in the same tone you speak of, but visually. Yeah,
I've never been involved in a political party or political movement or whatever, but it seems to me that the Greens have got some really interesting and prominent young people coming through. Gora's Garman's just the star. Chloe, she's going to get into Parliament this time. I think. If she does,
let's think about this now. Historically, she must be the youngest. Has there been? If she gets in, there been in 23, dude?
23 is pretty young.
I can't.
I know that Phil Goff was in his early 30s when he became a minister, so he must have been in there.
As an MP,
as an early MP, he might have been an
23
MP
though.
It's pretty young.
I just pulled that number. She's around that. Yeah.
I don't think age matters at all.
No. I'm not saying whether it matters or not. I'm saying
but
that
she will be judged on that. Absolutely, and is judged constantly on that.
Well, it's a representation of the people, and last time I looked, there's a bunch of 23-year-old and younger people around. Have you seen them?
And if she doesn't make it, that's probably not a bad thing either, because she'll go away and become a more experienced human being. But
she's good for democracy, because even whether you're a Green or not, she's getting people around her age to think more about voting.
And as I was saying, we know more about the young Greens than we know about the young Nats. They don't have... I hear that. Yeah.
You're saying that the generational change might also be that a party like that is ultimately engaging more with people than that older...
And they're more, they just... we know more about them, we can see them, and who are these young Nats coming through? It seems to be a little bit less... they're just going to... If you're a young Nat... and you're keen on becoming an MP, you'll do your time in a Labour safe seat. You'll put in 2 or 3 elections, and all of a sudden...
What do you mean you do your time? You take the hit each year just to be there.
Learn how to campaign.
They need to fill the losing seats. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. I never thought about that.
That's how it's always worked. I went to school with a young fella, one blue, one red, Nat, and a Labour. They stood in absolutely unwinnable seats for 2 or 3 elections. One of them ended up in Parliament working for a minister and now living in the UK. But he had designs on becoming an MP, and I'm sure if he'd stuck around in New Zealand, he would have got a safe seat eventually. And then people like Todd Barclay parachuted in, to a safe seat. He was destined for greatness. Clearly someone national thought that he would make, maybe Prime Minister one day, as laughable as that seems. Yeah. And look how that turned out. I think the way that the Greens are bringing the youngsters through now, I you got to say, well, maybe that's a reflection on the fact that their party is still relatively tiny. Yeah. But these are good people.
Yeah. Well, back to paraphrasing a number of things we've said. I think there's ultimately there's a greater. It feels like there's a greater representation of New Zealand in the mix this year for the election. Yeah.
And as I said about the New Zealand First list, some of them just shake my head. Knowing that...
That's all right, funeral music's quite popular.
Yeah, but, and that's probably the problem with having a party, Winston's in charge of that. Yeah. And if you're in charge of it, and he'll say, oh, no, we've got a committee and... Yeah, but if you... Look, honestly... If you don't know these people, if these people are so loose that at candidate meetings they say the most ridiculous things, is that what your party really stands for? Do you really know who you're selecting? And you've got to be very, very careful when you're casting that vote. Look at the list, Google some of these people, and, if you feel like voting New Zealand First and you look at that list and you think they're a bunch of knobs, even if you like Winston... Think twice about it.
I don't know if you remember this. I think it was Sainsbury's show, because you just hear so many calls. But the other day, there was just this brilliant snapshot of the slightly younger Winnie fan. And it was this sort of, husky, cigarette-voiced woman from the provinces talking about how her best friend basically, thought he was delicious, and they've got a poster of him up on the fridge and stuff. And I was like, wow. And but the point of that story could be lost. Was he's getting our vote. He's getting our vote. Yeah. And I thought there's a lot in that. There's a lot of people with him. It's just him.
Well, actually,
it's the Lego man grey great suit.
Well, in terms of
you don't remember that call?
Yeah, no, I do. I do
remember
it.
Yeah. It stuck out, right?
What it reminds me of is the other week when the Winston overpayment thing happened. Now, I suggested really, as soon as Mark arrived in at work that day, I said, look, here's the talk back in this. Winston is of a certain generation who believe that this is their right.
Right, yeah.
And it is their right.
Despite the $200,000 salary.
And he's been on this salary for, he does not need this money. No. And I said to Mark, the talk back today is whether Winston needs it, whether he was greedy in applying for, because you've still got to apply for it.
Tied in, obviously, with Ture needing it at the time. Yeah, well, is that a part of it?
Well, we'd done the Ture thing, and as much as it's going to come up in comparison, it was, I think we kind of set the agenda on that, and every morning I sit in the news meeting at News Hub, and I sort of suggested that was going to be our angle. Is Winston representative of a greedy generation? And that's where it went. And I've known Winston for a long, long time. I saw him on Monday. He said hi. We had a bit of a chat.
I'd imagine he's a charmer. That's his whole thing.
It is. Yeah.
So how did Mark play this out? I was going to say, isn't he kind of that generation? So he's quite a heavy stakeholder in that conversation.
Yeah. Well, he understood what I was saying, and he knew that there were calls in that, and it was something that he could run with, and it really was the only talk in it, because you could say, okay, is there any talk in the fact that someone leaked it? Is it a privacy issue? There's no talk in that. Oh, Winston's privacy has been, the talk is setting one generation against the other. Is Winston Peters greedy?
Great show.
And
not that I heard it, but great. I hear what you're saying. Great starting point for a show.
And so
do they end up with a punchline, Jeremy? What was New Zealand's punchline that day?
Well, you're going to get the Winston supporters ringing in, and you're going to get people younger than that saying, you're right, or whether Mark put it in those terms. But you're going to have people saying, well, actually, I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about that angle, but absolutely.
Oh my God, compromising with each other.
Yeah, well, yeah. But with talkback, the arguments, you've got to look for the conflict. You've got to look for where, but then it can't be pretend. You've got to throw it out there, and you've got to believe it. You've got to set one side against the other in setting your thesis for the day's program,
We're nearly there, mate. We have spoken for 1 hour, 18 minutes and 58 seconds.
Beautiful.
Do you still like to jump on the air when you can? Do you still enjoy hosting?
Every now and then. I mean, I've been thrown into the deep end on a few occasions. When Willie and JT were suspended with 15 minutes notice.
Shit, so one of the most high-profile shows in New Zealand at the time.
Yeah, and I was quoted on the front page of the Herald the next day when someone rang up and said, "Where's Willie and JT?" And I had to, I had to say, look,
I know he messed up, but they were very good radio. The two of them.
They were.
Let's face it.
And that was a very natural thing.
Yeah.
They knew each other.
And they'd wind each other up. The whole thing really worked.
They could have been better. They could have been slicker. But they're not. They weren't professional broadcasters. They were just guys. That's on
our list. That's on our list.
That's the thing. They had to do some learning, but they weren't. JT was there to be JT. Willie was there to be Willie. And if you're going to get people who aren't pros, you've got to encourage the thing about them that you employed them for.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this, and I've learnt a lot, and it's great to actually meet you out of Facebook land. Thanks for giving up your time.
No worries.
Popping in. Cool. Wow. Well, once we got going,
Yeah, no worries. It's sweet as.
You don't need a coffee or anything before you go?
No, mate, I've got
Where's your car?
It's just a little bit down the road, so...
that was great. Yeah. I've had a real range. I don't know if you've looked at the site. Obviously, when I send through your one, you can listen to it.
Margaret Marcus, hello.
Yes. No, it's hopeless. No. Get up.
Margaret?
Yes. Hey, but no, so it wasn't a mobile home.
This is going well, eh, Margaret?
Margaret.
Oh, just speaking there.
What? Margaret, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah.
Oh, just speaking there. What?
I think it might be a caravan.
It's more than 7 seconds a delay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
2, 3.
What's he counting for?
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 2, 3.
What's he counting for?
5, 6, 7, 8.
Margaret, have you got your radio on?
11,
Yeah.
12, 13.
He's talking about numbers.
Margaret, have you got your radio on?
Yes, it's on.
Could you turn it off?
Yeah.
He's talking about numbers. Margaret, have you got your radio on?
Yes, it's on.
Could you turn it off?
Yeah. He's talking about numbers.
Margaret, have you got your radio on?
Yes, it's on.
I can't do it. Margaret, could you turn your radio off?
I'll hang up, I think.
No, just turn your radio off.
Yes, my radio is on.
I can't do it.
No, turn it off.
Could you turn
Off.
It's just talking about numbers.
just turn your radio off?
Yes, all right.
Let's take a break.